Fellow gardeners, let's address something that might completely change how you view that beloved pile of decomposing organic matter in your backyard. You've been faithfully feeding your compost pile kitchen scraps, fallen leaves and grass clippings, confident that you're creating garden gold. But what if I told you that your compost pile might actually be working against you, quietly siphoning nutrients away from your plants when you need them most? This isn't about abandoning composting, quite the opposite. Understanding these hidden processes will transform you from someone who simply piles organic matter together into a master of nutrient cycling. Your compost can become the ultimate nutrient powerhouse instead of an accidental thief, but only when you understand what's really happening beneath the surface. Picture this. You've spent months carefully building your compost pile, adding the perfect mix of browns and greens, turning it religiously, and watching it slowly transform into what should be nutrient-rich humus. Yet your nearby plants seem to be struggling, showing signs of nutrient deficiency despite being mere feet from your composting operation. The shock of discovering that your nutrient factory might actually be competing with your plants for essential elements can be jarring. Most of us operate under the assumption that compost always gives back to the garden ecosystem. We envision nutrients flowing from our decomposing pile directly into the surrounding soil, enriching everything in its vicinity. This assumption, while well-intentioned, overlooks the complex biological processes occurring within and around your compost pile. The reality is that active composting creates a dynamic environment where nutrients don't just break down, they get redistributed, sometimes in ways that temporarily disadvantage nearby plants. The unseen forces at play involve armies of microorganisms, each with their own nutritional needs and waste products. These microscopic workers don't distinguish between the organic matter you've provided and the nutrients already present in your soil. When their demands exceed the immediate supply within the pile, they become opportunistic, drawing from whatever sources are available, including the root zones of your prized plants. The most insidious nutrient theft occurs through a process called nitrogen immobilization, and it's far more common than most gardeners realize. When you add high-carbon materials like wood chips, sawdust, straw, or dried leaves to your compost pile, you're essentially hiring an army of decomposer organisms to break down these tough structural components. However, these microbes require nitrogen to fuel their work, and if your carbon-to-nitrogen ratio skews too heavily toward carbon, anything beyond the ideal 25 to 30 to 1 ratio, these organisms become desperate. Think of it this way. You've hired a construction crew to renovate your house, but you've only provided them with building materials and no food. Hungry workers will find food somewhere, and in the composting world, that somewhere is often your surrounding soil. The microbes responsible for decomposing high-carbon materials will literally mine nitrogen from nearby root zones, leaving your plants nutrient-starved while they complete their decomposition work. Anaerobic conditions create an entirely different set of problems that are often overlooked by well-meaning gardeners. When your compost pile lacks adequate oxygen, usually due to being too wet, too compacted, or insufficiently turned, the beneficial aerobic microorganisms give way to anaerobic bacteria. These anaerobic conditions don't just create that unpleasant sulfur smell, they fundamentally alter the nutrient cycling process. Instead of efficiently breaking down organic matter into plant-available forms, anaerobic decomposition can tie up essential nutrients in forms that plants cannot readily access, while simultaneously producing compounds that may be toxic to plant roots. Certain fungi and bacteria, while essential to the composting process, can temporarily lock up key elements in their own cellular structures. Phosphorus and potassium in particular can become sequestered within microbial biomass for extended periods. These nutrients aren't lost forever, but they're essentially in biological savings accounts that your plants can't access until the microorganisms themselves die and decompose, a process that can take weeks or months longer than you might expect. Learning to read your compost pile like a book is one of the most valuable skills you can develop as a gardener. A healthy, balanced compost pile should have a rich, earthy aroma reminiscent of forest floor. The color should be dark brown to black, with a crumbly texture that holds together when squeezed but easily breaks apart. If your pile smells sour, ammonia-like, or putrid, you're looking at clear signs of imbalance that likely indicate nutrient problems. So, visual inspection actually reveals a ton of clues about your pile's nutritional status. For example, if your compost pile looks dry and dusty on top, but it's still soggy in the center, that usually means there's poor aeration going on, and you might be dealing with some anaerobic conditions. Now, if you notice that materials, especially those green ones that are supposed to break down fast, are decomposing super slowly, that's often a sign your pile is lacking nitrogen. On the flip side, if your pile is looking kind of slimy, with green materials breaking down way too fast while those browns just sit there, that's a pretty good indicator there's too much nitrogen and not enough carbon in the mix. Temperature is another really helpful diagnostic tool, and the best part is you don't need any fancy equipment to use it. A compost pile that's working well should feel warm to the touch during those active decomposition phases. But if your pile never really heats up or it cools off super quickly after you turn it, that's a sign there's probably not enough microbial activity, usually because of imbalanced nutrition or maybe just not enough moisture. And hey, you can do a quick squeeze test. Just grab a handful from different parts of your pile. It should feel like a wrung-out sponge, holding together for a second before it crumbles apart. The link between a struggling compost pile and underperforming garden plants becomes pretty clear when you take a close look at the vegetation right around your composting area. If you spot plants within about 10 feet showing yellowing leaves, stunted growth, or even delayed flowering, even though they're getting plenty of water and sunlight, that's often due to nitrogen immobilization. These symptoms usually show up most in fast-growing plants that need a lot of nitrogen, like leafy greens and annual flowers. Balancing your compost inputs requires more precision than simply alternating layers of browns and greens. Understanding the actual carbon-to-nitrogen ratios of your materials allows you to make informed decisions about what to add and when. Fresh grass clippings contain approximately 12 to 25 to 1 carbon-to-nitrogen ratio, while dried leaves can range from 30 to 80 to 1 depending on the species. Coffee grounds, despite their brown color, actually provide nitrogen at roughly 20 to 1, making them excellent for balancing high carbon additions. When you've already created an imbalanced pile, swift intervention can prevent prolonged nutrient theft from surrounding plants. If you've added too much high-carbon material, immediately incorporate nitrogen-rich amendments such as fresh grass clippings, vegetable scraps, or even a small amount of blood meal or fish emulsion. The key is thorough mixing. Don't simply layer these materials on top, but work them throughout the existing pile to ensure even distribution of nutrients for the microbial population. Aeration techniques in 2025 have evolved beyond simple turning with a pitchfork. Creating permanent aeration channels by inserting perforated PVC pipes vertically through your pile provides continuous oxygen flow without constant manual labor. This passive aeration system prevents the anaerobic conditions that lead to nutrient lockup while maintaining the proper moisture levels that active decomposition requires. For smaller piles, consider using a compost aerator tool, a long-handled device with retractable fins that creates air pockets when twisted and withdrawn. Monitoring moisture levels deserves special attention because honestly, both too much and too little water can trigger nutrient problems. The ideal moisture content should feel like a wrung-out sponge throughout the pile. During rainy seasons, covering your pile with a tarp prevents nutrient leaching while maintaining adequate moisture. And during dry periods, regular watering may be necessary, but it's important to add water gradually while turning to achieve even distribution. Advanced gardeners understand that true nutrient cycling extends beyond the compost pile itself into the broader garden ecosystem. Creating satellite composting areas throughout your garden, small pockets where you bury kitchen scraps directly, provides localized nutrient cycling without the risk of large-scale immobilization. This distributed approach ensures that decomposing organic matter feeds plants immediately rather than competing with them. Compost tea brewing represents a revolutionary approach to delivering concentrated nutrients directly to plants while, at the same time, building beneficial microbial populations in your soil. The process involves steeping finished compost in water with added nutrients like molasses or kelp meal, creating an oxygen-rich environment where beneficial bacteria and fungi multiply exponentially. This liquid gold provides immediately available nutrients while introducing the biological agents necessary for long-term soil health. The timing of compost application significantly affects nutrient availability. Rather than adding fresh compost during peak growing seasons when plants have maximum nutrient demands, consider applying it during dormant seasons when soil organisms can process and stabilize nutrients without competition from active root systems. This strategic timing prevents the temporary nutrient deficit that can occur when fresh organic matter begins decomposing in the presence of hungry plant roots. Creating buffer zones around active compost piles protects sensitive plants from temporary nutrient fluctuations. Establish a 10-foot radius where you plant only deep-rooted, nitrogen-fixing species like legumes or robust perennials that can actually benefit from temporary nutrient cycling. These plants serve as living filters, capturing any leached nutrients before they move beyond your garden's boundaries. Temperature management through pile location and construction affects both the speed of decomposition and nutrient retention. Placing your compost pile in partial shade prevents excessive heat that can volatilize nitrogen while maintaining sufficient warmth for active decomposition. Insulating your pile with straw bales or constructing it within a three-sided structure helps maintain consistent temperatures that optimize microbial activity without creating conditions for nutrient loss. Your compost pile has the potential to become the ultimate nutrient powerhouse rather than an accidental thief. The difference lies in understanding and managing the biological processes that transform your organic waste into garden gold. When you maintain proper carbon-to-nitrogen ratios, ensure adequate aeration, monitor moisture levels, and time your application strategically, your compost becomes a reliable source of slow-release nutrients that enhance rather than compete with your plant's nutritional needs. The journey from compost novice to nutrient cycling master requires patience, observation, and willingness to adjust your methods based on results. Remember that every garden is unique, and what works perfectly for your neighbor may require modifications for your specific conditions. Pay attention to your plants, monitor your pile's progress, and don't be afraid to experiment with different techniques until you find the perfect balance for your garden ecosystem. If this deep dive into compost nutrient cycling has opened your eyes to new possibilities in your garden, make sure to subscribe to the Humus Heritage channel for more advanced gardening insights that go beyond the basics. Share this information with fellow gardeners who might be unknowingly struggling with nutrient theft in their own composting operations. Together, we can transform gardens from coast to coast into thriving ecosystems where every nutrient works for the benefit of our plants rather than against them.